Hello all, Zysos here. Today I am doing a continuation of the non-Android efficiency series that I started a while back. I know it's been a while. This video was supposed to come out much closer to the Doctor Strange pack release, but I just never got around to it. So I'm doing it now. I have some ideas for at least the next one, but this video has been delayed long enough. Oh wait, before I need to mention there won't be a text version, like transcription of this anymore. The Alter Ego's website no longer exists, and because neither of us were really felt like writing articles when neither one of us is particularly writing heavy, and I always had this content over in video form anyway. So going forward, there would just be videos. There won't be any text versions, similar to the first one. Hopefully we'll be able to keep them down to a reasonable length, and I may even redo some of the older ones as time goes on. But first thing, we've got to go into the assumptions. So today we're talking about exhausting your hero identity card, and how much does that cost for use in some things, some evaluations of cards. So just some assumptions we're going to be making. Card is a resource. I'm continuing it because of ease of math. I actually think this is probably the next thing I'm going to cover. Like how much more is a card worth over a resource, because they are clearly worth more. These numbers in the next slide, they've actually changed relative to the previous videos. In previous videos, I said that damage was worth 2 for 1. And damage prevention and healing, which were equal, were worth as much as damage. I still believe they're worth as much as damage, but we now have basic cards of the same cost in the form of to the rescue and haymaker, and threat removal and damage is they are both out of they're both like out of aspects when in the basic set. So damage should be in aggression, thwart should be in justice. So they should have similar levels of efficiency when in the basic aspect, i.e. not very good. And their values happen to be 2 thwart and 2 threat removal and 3 damage. So I believe that this is actually the values that we're getting to. I also believe I said in the damage video that damage runs up to about 1.5 to 2, somewhere around there. This would line up pretty well with a 1.5 if thwart is worth 1, which is what I said that thwart was worth. So I'm going to continue using thwart of 1 card per 1 thwart, and 1 card, and nowadays it'll be 1 card per 1.5 damage. It makes the map a little bit more difficult, and then damage prevention and healing all run off from that. But it also means that like med team is on curve for healing. Most of the damage prevention effects are pretty trash, but it also means that the hero stats, the V2, 323, which are the maximums, are actually like they line up with a certain particular value. In fact, this value of 2 cards. So I'm going to be using that. I'm probably going to be using that in all videos going forward, and if I ever do redo those old videos, I'm going to adjust them to these values. Which I might need to do for at least one of them, because I think the healing one had some bits and bobs that were only in the article and not in the video, annoyingly. I'm not going to consider the cost of flipping to Alter Ego, which means I'm going to be trying to avoid talking about the recovery stat. There is a cost there because removing threat is more difficult, is more expensive than removing damage, and the values are roughly the same, and the boost icons should be identical, regardless of whether they're attacking or thwarting, although Claw messes with that a bit. So I'm just not covering, I'm not going into that. I just want to leave it outside the scope of today's video because it's hard to quantify how much that's worth, how much that's costing you. I could do it, but we'd be here for like an hour, and I'm trying to avoid an hour-long video. So I believe this is actually referred to as the opportunity cost, but I just want to quickly go into the true cost of what I'm calling the true cost of an exhaust. So the cost of an exhaust is the value of your next best stat that you didn't use. So if you attack with She-Hulk, her next best stat is probably her defense, although if you're flipping to Alter Ego, you would probably consider it your recover, provided you've got damage. So that means that if you're attacking, you're losing the fact that you didn't defend. If you're thwarting, though, you're losing your attack. And I would normally have like examples and stuff here for trying to work out the actual cost of this, but like we're going to go into some example cases, but I don't think that this particular concept is too outlandish that I really need to justify it. Like if I'm attacking, I'm not frauding. If I'm frauding, I'm not defending, assuming no other card effects. Like I'm just like this is just the exhaust on the character, and there's nothing else that's going to impact it. So yeah, like if you're gonna play 1-2 punch, you obviously need to attack. That would modify these values, but it's not something that I would worry too much about currently. It's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about how much, if you exhaust to, say, remove a attachment from the villain, how much does that cost you? In most cases too, but we'll get to that. So why does this matter? It's just useful to quantify particularly hero abilities that have an exhaust as part of the cost. So like Miss Marvel and Doctor Strange, who we'll get to, they're part of the two of the cases I'm going to cover. But also, it's quite useful because we're now getting more effects that adjust your stats. Like we've got Skilled Strike and Mean Swing now, that specifically adjust your stats to be slightly to adjust your attack stat to be slightly higher, and then you've got Desperate Defense and Expert Defense, adjusting your defense, and then you've now got Electrostatic Armor to put some damage on your defense. So being able to tell how much value you're losing by, say, defending allows you to work out how much you're gaining by using those cards, which we're going to go into. So let's just get to the next slide. So the first example I'm going to go into is Black Panther. It should be pretty clear why if you're familiar with the community and what decks people are playing currently. He's kind of become the de facto user of Mean Swing. But he's also a really good example because his stat line is it's the baseline. There are a few characters that already have this stats. Most people only vary by 1, maybe 2, at least on the hero side. Anything more than that is a little that's stranger. It's not normally something that would happen. But yeah, so his stat line's a pretty good baseline. He's got the maximum fraught, which, as you notice, 2 fraught should be 2 cards, and the other 2 are only sitting at like the 1.6, 1.3, 1.3. Sorry, other way around. Was dividing the wrong way. Yeah, so they're sitting at the 1.3 mark. So obviously the fraught's the best stat, which means typically you want to fraught with him every turn, which if there's threat, yeah, I would probably do that. He's got no other ability to exhaust. There'll be more on this later because I'm going into those characters when I get to them. Um, so it's just, but he's the, as I mentioned before, he's the de facto character for using mean swing. It's because he has multiple weapons and Shuri to find Yarnborn, like it all makes sense, but that whole combination makes sense, but there is an oddity with that deck, and that oddity is that once you start attacking with him instead of thwarting, you actually lose a lot of your threat removal, which means that an aggression doesn't have a lot in there to begin with, so you actually end up with this threat issue that can be difficult to overcome if you're not able to get tactical genius and enough Wakanda Forevers. But looking at it from an efficiency standpoint, a single mean swing means that you've spent one card and you're doing 5 damage, right? But it's obviously not just one card for 5 damage. That is a 1 to 5 ratio that's insane. Our like expected ratio is like 1.5, so you shouldn't be getting 5 damage for a single card. But if you've got if you remove the 2 fraught as well, so 2 fraught would have cost 2. It's now effectively costing you 3 cards, and you're generating about 3.33. Slightly better, slightly better than what you could have generated previously, which is not bad. Like it's better than the curve. It's above curve, as they say. That's a pretty good spot. Skilled strike, it's actually slightly below because it only generates 4, so it actually generates like 2.6. It's 2.66. I should have put the math in the slide, but so skilled strike, like a single skilled strike, probably isn't worth it on a 2/2/2 character. Like running skilled strike without running mean swing. Obviously, if you get more than one, or if you get other effects that make you want to attack, it could be worth it. But that's not the case that we're in currently. I don't think, off the top of my head. Maybe you can remove too much threat with your character, and you just got time to attack. That's a possibility, but you need to be able to do it consistently to justify the skilled strike in your deck outside of situations where the stats are actually going to line up. But in this case, this works out really well for Black Panther in general. So this is an example of the math working in his favor. Most people have already caught on to this particular example. So we see a lot of mean swing out there. Mean swing Black Panther. It's pretty strong. I think I even streamed it like last week. The next example is Hulk. I gotta stop flicking down before I'm ready to talk about it. The next example is Hulk. The reason, I just realized I've put these stat numbers in the wrong order. I've got attack at the top because I do that all the time. I forget that fraught's the top one. Yeah, so if you see any of my numbers, this is the attack stat, this is the fraught, this is the defense. I just always forget that on the card it's fraught, attack, defense. I don't know why, but I always think attack's first. So this is the reason we're talking about Hulk. He's just come out, but the main reason I actually am talking about him here is he's the most extreme deviation from the norm. He's 2 fraught less, and he's got an extra attack and defense. So he's effectively 4 off from the normals, from the baseline, which is as big as we got currently. Most just like details and information, if you consider it with Hulk, it also probably applies to characters with 1 fraught and 3 attack, or 3 defense, which is Spider-Man, Thor, Thor kind of because of the hammer, and She-Hulk. So anyway, in the case of Hulk, anything that increases attack or defense is effectively costless. Right, if I play electrostatic armor, defend, dealer damage, like I've just added a damage to using one of my best stats. If I throw on a combat training, I've added a damage to my damage stat. It's also pretty good. Hulk's hero set forces him to favor attack over defense, but the point still stands. It doesn't really matter which of these stats you're modifying. If you modify one of those two stats, it's in your favor. It's just gravy. However, Heroic Intuition, the card, if I've got the right name, it's the card that adds +1 frauds, is not. And it basically never is. On a 1 fraud character, you could theoretically put it down. You would have spent 3 cards to get it so that your attack or defense is the same as your fraud, which is not completely terrible. It would mean that you've effectively thrown 3 cards to the wind for no value, because you're only going to be getting the value that you were going to get just in a different way. So it makes you more versatile, but it's not making you any more powerful. And depending on the needs of your deck, that could be valuable, but in Hulk, it's not worth it. Adding the +1 fraud just means that you now can throw some value away by exhausting your character to fraught for 1. It's just a waste of efficiency. That you're better off finding other ways to remove threat. Which is why his pack comes with so many threat removal options, between Brawn, To the Rescue, the fact that he has Suborbital Leap in his deck, and I'm sure there was one more off the top. Oh, and Beat Cop. Like, all just options that don't require you to exhaust. They don't actually have you. They have you frauding. Like, To the Rescue has you frauding, but not with your stat. They just avoid your stat altogether. And they're like, that's a good thing to do for this character's design and for this pack's design. But now that we're talking about the more extreme cases, let's just talk about the characters that actually use this analysis. I want to talk about Miss Marvel first, because we've had her longer, and her stat line is just atrocious. So it makes sense to talk about her. The best she can do out of all these stats, you can use your 1 fraught to generate 1 resource of advantage. Now, I have used the 1 attack to clear off tough and stuff. That's a little different, because that's generating the resources of whatever the next attack is. But her hero ability is actually probably the best stat that she has. Best stats in air quotes there, because it's not really a stat. Because it is extremely versatile, and it always generates at least 1 resource of value. Like, if you need a resource, you just, when you play your first event, you take it back. First one event with the appropriate trait. Then you need to clear more threat or deal more damage or prevent more damage, like whatever you just played, you can now play it again. That can be useful. Even just preventing 6 damage instead of 3 with wiggle room, drawing 2 cards, like, that's actually pretty insane, that particular case. It's like, yeah, the wiggle room has like a negative cost. It's really, really silly. But there are other hero cards that do it. Obviously, in this case, this is when recovery, the fact that I'm not talking about the recovery and alter ego and cost of that, That's when this is one of those characters where that's where this particular video it isn't really in the scope of it. But I figured I should just mention recovery is very good on her. 5 recover is insane. You probably want to use that if you're not using the hero ability, unless of course there's something on the board that needs clearing, or you just don't have damage. But this is what Miss Marvel's all about, and you can see with this particular example that this hero ability is basically costless. Generates 1 resource for 1 resource of cost. So you should be using it just anytime you can. Yeah. So anyway, the next character is Doctor Strange. So you may have heard that he is quite good. So we're just going to go into that. His best hero stat is clearly his 2 fraud. 2, 1, 2, or as I would have put it, 1, 2, 2. The 2 frauds is better than the 2 defend, which is better than 1 attack. It's weird that it was paired with protection. Like it makes sense in retrospect because we needed more protection cards, but just pairing him with protection when he's got a stat line like that meant that it was really hard to make use of the defense cards in protection. But like Iron Man has a strong protection deck, so it's not completely impossible or anything like that. So the important things here, 2 fort is obviously his best stat on his card, but he's got this ability down the bottom. And he has 2 exhaust per turn. So I could see the argument that someone would make saying that because he has 2 exhaust per turn, each exhaust is worth less, so he can afford to use 1 attack because he's got another use anyway. Well, but that's not the case. Each exhaust has to be treated separately, and they can both generate 2 resources in the form of fraud, provided there's enough threat. Obviously, if there's no threat on the table, and I suppose you would also need like no invocation cards to be able to be played. But if there's no threat on the table, you could justify using the 1 attack. But generally speaking, if you're not using an invocation card, you will be using the 2 threat. Now the invocation cards are where this starts getting silly. So if we do invocation cards, if we use an invocation card, there are 5 invocation cards. We never know what one is. Well, we always know what one's up, but we never know, like from the start of the game, which one will be the one that we have at any given point. So, the Vapors of Voltor is situational useful, and it only really generates values on swapping tough statuses. A Confuse and a Confuse will stop like 4 to 5 damage, and Confuse will stop 3 to 4 threats, and a stun stop 4 to 5 damage. So 4 to 5 damage is about 3 cards. So Confuse is slightly more valuable. But it's not like a huge difference. Like you can generate like 1 resource based off of it, but you also just need to be able to use it immediately. So you like, I suppose you know what state you're going to be in, so you can work vapors around that. It's really good going from tough to one of those others though, because like turning a tough on your enemy is saving you at least 1 damage. and then turning it into a stun or confuse, generating that resource. Instead of losing resources, you're just getting tons. And doing the same on yourself, turning a stun into a tough is just really is a pretty good swing. Stun into tough is like depending on what it depends what your attack was going to be, what attack you were going to use to clear it. But if you were going to use, say, Magic Blast, that's like 5 resources, 5 damage, about 3, and then you get another 3 from the tough status. So yeah, you can get some pretty insane values there. So you're losing 2, but you're gaining whatever you can off of this. It's hard to really go into details because Vapors of Voltor is that one really strange card. There's a lot of weird things going on with that. The Seven Wings of Ragador, however, is easier to talk about. So it's 3 cards in total, so 2 fraught and then 1 cost on the card, for a total of 3 tough, which is about 3 cards. So we're talking, because it's about 4 to 5 damage, so if we go split the difference and say 4.5, that happens to be 3 cards of value, and that means we're generating between 8 and 10. Right, so 9. Roughly 9 cards. So that's 6 cards of value generated by playing this one card. That is insane. That is stupidly high. That would mean, so we've spent 3 and we're generating 9. That's a 3 to 1 efficiency ratio. So we're expecting about the same. We're expecting about 1 tough token from playing a card. And we're getting 3 tough tokens. It's silly. It's part of what makes Doctor Strange so strong. Hero abilities normally do generate some value. For instance, Spider-Man generates a card. Captain America, you ready, costing a card, but then you can thwart for 2 to gain 2 cards of value. So effectively gaining you a card. Iron Man's ability caps out at 7, effectively giving him a 1 card after he's built up. Like, because versus the other 6/5 characters, because I'm pretty sure he would be a 6/5 if he didn't have that ability. So there's a lot of characters, and they all generate roughly 1 card of value most of the time. And then the Seven Wings of Ragador with its 9, with its just +6 value is kind of insane. So the Winds of Watum, however, 2 cards to draw 3 cards. That's actually 1 card. Like, that's actually a reasonable amount. Like, I wouldn't... Like, I'm not going to complain about that because it's value. But that's probably the worst of them. Icons of Icon cost 3 cards of value to generate 4 threat removal and a confuse, which means you're already at the +1. Then you get the confuse on top, which is somewhere around the 3 to 5 mark, I would say on average. And that means that like that's just say 4. Let's say it's 4. It's like 4 extra cards of value, 5 extra cards of value. Like, it's not quite as good as 7 Wings of Ragador, but it's pretty close. Like, it's 5 versus 6. And the Crimson Bands of Sidorak, 4 cards for 7 damage. 7 damage is 4.6. And then you get a stun on top of that, and the stun is another 3-ish. Same as the 7 Wings. So we're talking 7.6 cards of value. So that's like 3.6. Like, it's a little bit lower. But all 3 of these ones that are dealing with status tokens are severely undercosted. And I think we see this, and this is the reason I try to avoid talking about status cards when they come up. We see this across the board. Anything that generates a status token is probably cheaper than it should be, at least at this point in the game. I think that the developers of this game, so Boggs and Caleb, didn't get the feedback that they needed to realize just how powerful these status cards were in time to be ready for this cycle. I'm sure they have it now. The Captain America Stunlock deck was one of the first decks out of the Captain America pack. It was one of the first packs that came out. They're probably keeping an eye on status cards going forward, but it might be a little bit before we get to that. But Doctor Strange is probably going to be the most egregious example because he is the status card character. He has so many different status cards in his set. So I think we should be good going forward. But anyway, that was actually the end of this. So I hope this helps you going forward. Maybe there's a character coming out that you like and you just want to be able to fully understand how the exhausting ability they have works, like how much it's actually costing, like things like, say, Doctor Strange. It's really hard to evaluate this ability without being able to convert it into a value for cost, without being able to turn it into a cost. Like you need to know how much that's going to cost to really evaluate that ability. And I'm sure we'll get something similar. We've got 2 characters in the first 6 that do this, so there will probably be some going forward as well. And I'm hoping that this will be helpful to some people going forward. And that's the end of this. And the last thing, this is just the credit slide for this templates that I'm using for this PowerPoint. I know it was missing from the earlier videos. That's another reason I want to actually revisit them. Turns out I wasn't copying from the initial source. I had just a copy of some PowerPoint that I gotten from somewhere that was using these layouts. But I've lost that, misplaced it somewhere. When I went to go find a replacement, something new, I found the original sources, and it requires that you use the credits, which whoever I stole it from obviously didn't. But I'm just going to give them credit now. All my videos that use these templates going forward will have a mention of who made it here, this credit slide. But you also notice that it meant that I could actually be a lot more dynamic with colors and such that I wasn't able to do in previous videos. So that is it, and I've accidentally turned off the slideshow. Sorry about that. Just seen nothing that you weren't meant to, but wouldn't have looked nice. So that's it for me. I'll probably be back in a week, maybe 2, doing another one of these efficiency videos because I want to talk about the card is not a resource thing that I've mentioned in my assumptions every single time. Until then, I shall see you next time.